Hey guys, welcome back. My name is Malferon, and if you've been here before, you know that this is a list I am very, very proud of. So this is sort of like my premiere list, Sonic Boom, which was first featured in Set 10. This is the Set 11 update. And so if you haven't seen the Set 10 video, I'd recommend it. It lays a lot of strong foundation. We're going to be using a fair amount of the same slides. There's a lot updated here. The general layout will feel very familiar if you've seen the Set 10 video, but I think there's plenty of new content in Set 11 that I think warranted its own video. Now, this video did come out a little bit late. I would have ideally liked it maybe halfway through the set, but I really wanted to make sure that this list felt extremely solid and that the final list really was something that I was very satisfied with. There's a little bit of unconventionalities with it, but you know, all my lists kind of have that. And so it's going to be a pretty in-depth video, so buckle up. If you are mostly here for the deck list itself, there's going to be chapters and shortcuts down below in the YouTube bar, and so you can just feel free to hop around the navigation. But, you know, I would encourage you, if you're at all interested, to watch the whole video. I think there's a lot of valuable information, and I probably cover most questions that people would have through all the different subsections. So, with no further ado, let's dive right in and start with an outline like I always do. So we're going to be talking just kind of like, you know, an introduction, talking about Sonic Boom, some of the, you know, background and, you know, why the list the way it is, what kind of came to be, and some like major topics to hit. We're going to be talking about some the feature cards in the list, notably the Set 11 updates. There's a lot of like theory and mindset on the list, how to approach a list like Sonic Boom. It is a Sapphire Steel list. It is a 2-4-6 ramp list, but there is a lot of like differences in how you think about card draw, filtering, your ink count, and you know, removal options that I think sort of warranted its own section. We're going to talk a little bit about deck building and how you decide your Ariel count. I will offer like other versions of an Ariel style blue steel list, but then also like kind of how you think about song counts, Ariels, etc., etc. We're gonna talk about the deck list itself, of course, tech slots, mulligan strategies. We're gonna go over matchups, and then we're gonna talk about some play lines. Okay, so introduction. Why Ariel, right? So one, she's the best princess. I just love Ariel. I have a big soft spot for Ariel. And, you know, she's got that joy, that charm. She's got that naivete. She's got some of the best songs, you know, like Ariel herself. The Little Mermaid really sparked off the Renaissance period for Disney and kind of salvaged a lot of what Disney was losing coming out of the 80s. And, you know, just something about Ariel just really like is that like powerful, energetic innocence of a Disney princess, but has all the bravery, courage, and charisma of a Disney princess. So I think it was really cool that they gave Ariel this Sonic Warrior variant, right, where you kind of get to see her sort of armored up a little bit to stand up for her kingdom, and you know, see her kind of level up in a sense. Now she has this card, Sonic Warrior, as a 6-cost steel card that is 3/8, quest for 2. It originally came out in Set 4, Ursula's Return, but then was reprinted in Fabled Set 9. Which was sort of the first set where there was a rotation. So they took sets 1 through 4 and made them non-legal, illegal in the core constructed format, which is the main competitive format. And so now with her reprint, right, she's legal and liable again to be put in decks. And, you know, one of my favorite things about Ariel is that she just has this unmatched removal potential, right? So she can deliver a repetitive series of damage that almost no other card can really match, right? So at the cost of 2 ink, whenever you play a song, you can deal 3 extra damage to a chosen character. This is extremely valuable, one, because you can bolster the amount of damage from a single song onto a single target to eliminate a large target, or, you know, Ariel can turn almost every single song into 2 songs, right? And so if you play Strength of a Raging Fire, yeah, you can do 3 damage to one target, but then with Ariel, you can do 3 damage to another target. So you get this really interesting form of card value where every single song turns into like effectively 2 with Ariel, as long as you have the ink to spare. And of course, the reason we're playing her in Sapphire Steel is because, you know, we will create situations for having the ink to spare to actually use the ability. She has extremely strong base stats. One could argue that she's overstated, right? For a 6 cost, having 8 willpower and 2 lore and 3 strength, and you can shift her and be inkable is incredible, right? And it really allows her to kind of stick to the board and stay on the board and maintain a threatening presence. So one, she has really good princess energy, which is very relevant ever since Cinderella Dream Come True got printed back in set 10, Whispers in the Well. And then she facilitates these very, very powerful snowbally high rolls that, you know, if Ariel's not answered and you're hitting the songs like you want to hit, many games are just game over. So what's kind of changed in from set 10, right? And so one, kind of like a quick review of the historical context, right? So, you know, Ariel Sonic Warrior didn't see a lot of play pre-set 9. Her biggest challenges was that it was really hard to play her on a curve, right? To actually play her on 6 ink or even shift her on her, like, one of, like, 2 shift targets on, like, 4 ink and really gain any actual value from her ability, right? Yeah, she's a big body, you know, she's a 3/8, but, you know, if you're not using her ability, you'd rather play almost anything else, really. So the ability to kind of play her on any sort of reasonable curve and then also have a follow-up where you could continue to play relevant characters or relevant, like, you know, win conditions like items or whatever else, and have the ink to use her ability after singing a song and have that feel good was really, really hard. And it wasn't until Cinderella Dream Come True got printed that you could actually just play a princess character like Sonic Warrior and then keep ramping and facilitate having a larger ink count that naturally fits the amount of ink you would need for a trigger while still playing relevant key characters like 5 cost and 6 cost, that many of them are also princesses as well. So Cinderella really, like, unlocked Ariel Sonic Warrior. She was also really held back by the fact that, you know, like cards like Medusa were printed, which was a Ruby 6 cost character that simply by playing her, you could banish a character with 3 strength or less, right? Which basically checked many characters like Ariel Sonic Warrior. And so, you know, it felt terrible to play Sonic Warrior and then just have a Medusa come down and immediately get rid of her. And you're kind of left in the dust. And then, like, you know, there was like Be Prepared, which is a 7 cost Ruby song that could just, you know, banish all characters on the board. It was extremely prevalent, and so Ariel also just really struggled into gaining any relevance when board wipes were so common, but also so easy to get to, and still maintain lots of card advantage. Like Red Purple was the most common use of Be Prepared on the top of Red Blue, and Red Purple just had so many cards, so they would just like stockpile removal options after wiping the board with the first Be Prepared. And so, you know, Ariel just felt like she couldn't keep pace or stay relevant enough to stick on the board to actually start delivering her value. So, you know, when we think about like Cinderella and you know, ramp lines, right? And so Cinderella unlocks Ariel to be used. And then we think about like the set 11 meta. So what's kind of changed since then? Well, one, the set 11 meta is way more diverse, way more robust. So this is both like good and complicated for the Sonic Boom list, right? So Sonic Boom was created in set 10 sort of out of like a intense purple meta, right? So you had a lot of purple steel. It was like 40% were purple steel. You have a lot of blurple, right? You even had the rise of like a tempo yellow purple, right? And so the list was a specialist at beating purple lists, right? Sonic Boom really shined in that regard. Sonic Boom's always kind of struggled against some emerald lists, right? But a lot of those emerald lists, especially blue-green, was largely kept in check by like purple steel and then like, you know, green-yellow dogs. Set 11 finds itself in a really interesting situation where the meta is actually very wide, and there's a lot of like very viable options. You know, like the top of the meta is relatively, you know, sound, right? You have your blurple, you have your dogs. You know, one could argue that like green, blue, yellow, purple, purple steel are all up there too. But like everything else is kind of fighting for like a tier 1.5 to tier 2. And so, but, you know, Sonic Boom has legs into all of it, but, you know, it has its worst matchups, it has its good matchups. But the thing is, like, what I'm trying to get to is that all the lists have, like, 1 to 2 really bad matchups, like, maybe 1 to 4, or, like, 1 to 3 really good matchups. And then there's a lot of, like, just kind of 50-50s or, like, 45-55, like, neutral matchups across the board for most lists. And so, like, a lot of lists are trying to tech for a lot of other lists, tech being, like, putting in unique cards to specifically plan for a certain strategy or a certain deck list. And then that kind of makes all their other matchups suffer. And so there's kind of like this weird rock, paper, scissors situation in set 11 that kind of changes how I approached putting in tech options, but then also kind of just, approaching creating the list in general. So the set 11 meta was very interesting, very wide, which for some people like they either like or disliked. The other challenging thing about set 11 was that there's the great return of board wipes, right? So we have Raging Storm was printed, Amber 8 cost, banish all characters. And we're already dealing with, the Prince Philip, Mean Malicious Scary, and, like a cheeky Under the Sea setups. But now, like with this, there's a whole lot more lists that are more than happy to just run 4 board wipes, play around the fact that they have a board wipe, and just sort of like, ignore what you're going to do, knowing that they can just wipe you out, right? So setting up and building your large body of singers is suddenly a lot more complicated. Especially if you don't know how to play around this, but also if you have no choice but to play into it, right? Because like it's like the only line you have. So that's a little tricky. It changed kind of like how you have to think about the list, how you have to think about lines, and how you have to think about like hand advantage, etc., etc. The other nice thing about set 11 was that they reprinted Let It Go, which is huge, right? This is an inkable removal card, right? So not only is it removal, it like literally just gets rid of any character, no matter the willpower. And so this is an extremely powerful tool to add to our repertoire, and is in large part, replaced But I'm Much Faster. Now, one could argue also, and I actually, depending on the day, agree with this, that Let It Go was arguably worse for our list, because Let It Go gave like Blurple and Blue Yellow extremely powerful options to count, to like actually pick apart our list, where historically they didn't really have the ability to do that until they got to Hades, which gave you a lot of time to build your singer counts. So Let It Go is kind of, it's a double-edged sword for sure. It's given us really powerful tools to deal with big bodies like, Prince Philip, Vanquisher of Foes, like opposing Hadeses or Stitches or Demonas or whatever else. And of course we get an aerial trigger out of it, but it does mean our own aerials can get Let It Go pretty easily. And so you have to be very aware of that. So, when you think about Ariel Sonic Warrior, you have to think about songs, right? So songs is the heart of her ability, right? It's her main fuel engine. And so these are all the songs in Sapphire and Steel that are legal right now for Core Constructed. For simplicity, we're going to zero out songs that I think are just really not very relevant. And then, left in here in red, you have what I would consider your core songs, right? So if you're going to build a Sonic Boom list, these are songs that are, I would say, are essentially like non-negotiables, right? Some people might be a little stickler about Mob Song. I have now had way too many games won or like came back from with Mob Song. I consider a one of Mob Song at least as a core to the deck style, right? And the deck very easily can sing it. And so Strength of Raging Fire, He Hurled His Thunderbolt, Let It Go, and Beyond the Horizon are kind of, no-brainers, right? And so as far as like other like very reasonable tech cards, I love Down in New Orleans. I'm a big, I adore that card. And so, I think it's actually a really good tech option for a deck like Sonic Boom that can very easily utilize it and sing it. But other like really good tech options are, one jump ahead to improve your consistency, keep the ancient ways to lock in and secure a win by denying actions like board wipes, and then But I'm Much Faster, which is still a great card. I think just the general usefulness of Let It Go overall out impacts I'm Much Faster, but I'm Much Faster is still a phenomenal song, especially being for a 1-cost inkable. So shift targets, right? We kind of covered this in the first video back in set 10. This is literally all of the Sapphire Steel aerials that have been printed other than Sonic Boom since the creation of the game. One of them coming from set 1. It's funny that 2 of them are uninkable, right? And they reprinted only Determined Mermaid, right? So is not a bad card per se, but she's extremely mediocre, and it's hard to justify her having a spot in really any list, especially when shifting Sonic Warrior really doesn't have high impact. You don't have the ink to utilize her ability, and there's not a lot of like really good 6-cost or less songs that feel relevant enough to sing that early without her trigger, right? And so, and historically there was A Whole New World. It's actually a really strong justifier to employ the shift line, but without A Whole New World, it's kind of hard to really sell it. So what are some of the key feature cards and notably the set 11 cards that are in the list, right? So we have Belle, Snowfield Strategist. She is a 4-cost inkable 2/3 that quests for 2, and effectively you can think of her as like a 5th Cinderella. When I was looking at the list and trying to and really paying attention to the honestly over 1,000 practice games that I did with the list, one thing I did notice is that, you know, missing the 4-cost felt really bad. But 2, just like many games with how relevant and impactful singing on your 4-cost curve, right? Like singing with a He Hurled His Thunderbolt, sometimes more rarely a strength, can either just secure or begin your victory lap, right? You know, getting that good 4-cost meant a lot. Now, but of course, you know, Belle getting her ink value is trickier, right? Because whenever your character is banished, you may put that card into your in your inkwell, face on and exerted. But that means, and that counts for her, so that means that if she would ever get banished, she guarantee gives you that bonus ink, which is really nice. That means that she's a singer, right? So you can sing with her and really don't care that much if she gets banished because she's giving you value no matter what. So that's kind of cool to have one of your 4-costs, you know, be like a singer that you don't have to stress about. The other thing is that she allows like these really interesting and curious setups. If you played an early Mulan or Tipo, right, you can actually make some early trades against like things like aggro decks or setting up a Tinkerbell later, and then those like, you know, early weenies like Mulan and Tipo that may get banished in those trades, actually all that does is ramp you. And in some games it actually ramps you faster than a Cinderella. Like it gets you to a 7-drop faster than Cinderella ever could. And so that's actually a really cool feature of Belle. And so I think Belle is actually really cool. She is only a 1 of in the list. She used to be 2 of, but there's just, you know, the list is very tight. And so she was good enough that I didn't want to drop her, but she was not good enough that it was hard to like justify more than 1 right now with how the list is set up. Now, the other cool thing about her is that she gives you really cool recovery against all the board wipes that are now in the meta. And so like if you like get to the point where you're questing out, you have a lot of characters on board, and if they like play Raging Storm or Prince Philip board wipe, I mean, many times every single character is turning into ink. So, you know, many times you'll get a bonus like 3 to 5 ink, and that allows you to just play like multiple big characters usually after that. Like if you played a Goliath and then you refill and you have 2 big characters, you can just slam them both down. So that's kind of cool. So Angel is one of the big premier cards of set 11, who you know, got put into almost every steel deck, right? Not even because she's that great, but because her adaptable flexibility is pretty unmatched, right? So she effectively allows you to, once per turn, you can discard a card and turn any card into a Fire the Cannons, right? So any card can turn into 2 damage. Now, you know, I'd say in the large majority of games, she ends up as ink in a list like this, but the fact that she can, at any point, turn, you know, on an uninkable card, like a card that's just not very relevant, or just like even like help close out a game or something by finishing off like this one character with like, you know, a character that wasn't removal, but you can turn it into removal. That's really, really cool. I'd say in most case scenarios in the set 11 meta, she basically turned into like a Grandma Willow killer. You know, you disrupt their ramp lines, and then you kind of move on with your life. And so she's really, really good into dogs, really, really good into Amber Steel aggro, some Purple Steel aggro variants. You know, like if you have any sort of card draw, she allows you to have basically like endless removal without having to sing with her, and you know, without having to really pay any extra cost other than the card in your hand. So very, very cool. Moana is one of the new Sapphire Legendary set 11. She allows you to ink from the discard. Now, it's not like an additional ink, right? It just means that your 1 ink per turn now can come from the discard, which also means that things that give you additional inks, such as, you know, Belle Strange but Special, who's now rotated out, but Sail the Azurite Sea, right, means you can additionally keep inking from the discard as many times as it allows you. Now, she is really, really cool because that's such a unique form of card value that she allows you to conserve your hand because you're generating resources, right? Your ink account from your discard, cards you've already used, right? So it feels amazing to play like a Strength of a Raging Fire, sing, get rid of a character, and then have that Strength of a Raging Fire just turn into an ink, right? That's amazing. Talk about you know, being resourceful. She opens up a really, really cool high roll, right? Where if you play Sail the Azurite Sea to ramp on turn 2, and then play Cinderella, you know, you use Cinderella trigger, you ink to 5, and then you can play Moana, and then use Moana's ability to ink that Sail the Azurite Sea that you did on turn 2, and then like, get another Cinderella trick at the end of that turn. So you've basically like jumped from 5 to 7 ink, but your hand size has not changed at all, right? It's actually like not shrunk a single bit. So you just gained 2 cards, which is so powerful, right? And so because of that, she allows you to delay playing a Goliath or really any real form of card draw for a little while, and just snowballs a really strong early game into like an oppressive mid game where you can sometimes start deploying multiple threats when you really wouldn't have, especially with a healthy hand. So the problem is that she has 4 willpower and that she kind of just dies to Thunderbolt and Elsa and Strength. Really, she just kind of dies on curve. And so lists like blue, yellow don't really care about that, right? Because they're just going to board wipe you anyway. But us, we kind of need a lot of our 5 and 6 drops to sort of stick, right? We kind of need them to not be banished instantly. And so Moana is a very like select card that kind of, you have to be very strategic on when you deploy her. And she's honestly just as relevant at any point in the game, not just on curve. And so because of that, she used to be at 2, but now she's been brought down to 1. Pete is probably one of the most relevant new Sapphire cards that come out this set. Pete is he's a ghost, right? He's a special form of Whisper, where his effect is he's 5/5, quest for 1. When he quests, you get to look at the top cards of your deck, depending on how many cards are under him, right, from boosting or whatever else, and you can pick one, put in your hand. So he's essentially visions of the future on a body, and the more you boost him, the more you can basically secure your perfect game, right? So him and Ariel go perfect hand in hand together. You just keep boosting Pete, you keep questing, and then you just keep finding songs, and then you just keep doing whatever you want. He needs to be answered pretty quick or most games are over. And so that's kind of cool. The nice thing is that if he gets Hades or Let It Go or whatever else, right, you're getting a whole bunch of ink out of it because he's boosted. So that's kind of nice. It's actually really, really annoying to out because he's 5/5. And so there's no like super easy, convenient removal for him other than World's Greatest Criminal Mind. The challenging to him feels really bad because almost everything will die in the process. Sometimes you get a 2 for 1. So Let It Go. We kind of touched this already. It's an amazing song. It's a little bit of a double-edged sword, but it is what it is. We're happy it's here. The cool thing is that, you can use your old art. I actually prefer the Chapter 1 art compared to the Chapter 11, but, they're both good in their own right. And then a little bit of a special shout out. Donald is not in the list anymore. He was for a very long time. I put Pluto back in. But I did want to highlight him because he was in the list for so long, and honestly, I see him pretty equivalent to Pluto. But he's a new form of instant item removal, which is pretty nice on such a well-statted body. He's got 4/6, so that's an awesome stat line for surviving almost anything. And then being able to contest board or sing safely, questing for 2, and then, giving you a little bit more agency to banish an item instantly as opposed to waiting or having a clunky setup like with Pluto, right? These are your feature cards early in the game. It's things that if you've seen any of my videos, you've seen these before. And so, turn 2 ramp is extremely crucial, and we are using a single 1 jump ahead in this list. So we are running 9 sources of turn 2 ramp, 4 TPO, 4 sail, 1 jump ahead. The deck, this is the deck, right? The deck requires this. This is the main opener for the deck. There's not really a good backup line, so you kind of have to hit your turn 2 ramp. Cinderella is almost always, like 97% of the time, your preferred opener. There's very, very few exceptions to that. And so, she's what the deck wants to do. She's a great singer. She keeps the deck moving. And so, when you play a princess character at the end of your turn, you can put a card from your hand into your inkwell and draw a card, right? So it just gets you free ink. And most of the deck is princesses to keep triggering her while you're doing your own thing. We already talked about Belle. We already talked about Angel. And then, of course, there's Hero's Thunderbolt. And our 1-drop is Mulan, who is both a princess, but also a filter to keep looking for answers, which is really awesome. The mid game, we kind of touched on a few of these as well, Moana and Pete. We have some of our classics coming back. Namari, who continues to just be a house, right? When you play her, you can draw and discard. And then at the beginning of your turn, every turn you can draw and discard. She basically keeps looking for songs, right? That's kind of her purpose, on top of being a massive threat because her strength equals how much is in your discard. So you have to be a little bit careful with her early on. Like, you can't play her too early against like a dog's list. She'll get under the seed. Or like, if you play her a little too early against something like Blurple, she might get like Elsa before she's an actual threat. But in most case scenarios, she effectively like will just take down anything with her, sometimes multiple things, because her strength is like 10 plus. And she just that's works in our favor because no one really wants to trade into her because it feels bad. So she keeps at the beginning of your turn looking for your preferred answer, right? Let's say you're about to draw a Tipo, well, you can throw that into the discard, and then you're able to find your songs easier, you're able to find your big bodies easier, you're able to find your draw engines easier, and so Nomara just helps get through your deck faster for things that you want. Of course, we have Ariel, who's the premier of the list. We already talked about her a lot. Tinkerbell, who's a standard, right, a classic in any Sapphire Steel list. She's just one of the best 6-drops in the game. She allows you to fight the board really well. She splashes damage on everything, and then she gains a lot of value and she quests for 2. And then we have Pluto as our form of item removal, right? So it's 5/5 quest for 2. He's a 5 cost. He allows you, every time you play another Steel character, you can banish an item. So he gives repetitive item removal, which is pretty relevant in the set 11 meta. There's the major threat of Emerald Chromacon, where I actually think Donald Duck, along for the ride, does a better job of handling Emerald Chromacon more consistently. But, one of the big item threats this set is Snow Fort, which gives all of your opponents' characters +1 strength, but also +1 resist on your turn, which is when it's most relevant. And this is an Emerald card, 3 cost uninkable. And so other cards like Amethyst Chromacons that are drawing a whole bunch for these burn decks, be able to set up your item removal, whenever it kind of just fits, right? So not having to save the Donald in your hand, but then also being able to repetitively remove items for these other item variants, I thought was actually crucial and important enough, which is what led me to go back to Pluto over Donald. Of course, Goliath, our main draw engine, and then he hurled us Thunderbolt, which is really more of an early to mid-game card for getting rid of key sources. And then cards like Strength of Raging Fire and Mob Song are kind of your, and Let It Go are more of your late-game song removals. Let It Go, because in a perfect world, you don't want to give your opponent ink too early, right? Extra ink too early, but then, also Strength of Raging Fire, so you have more bodies for it to actually do something decent. And then, of course, our typical bomb characters, the Bash Brothers, Hades, Vincenzo, and Arthur. Hades on play, you can ink a character. Vincenzo on play, you can do 3 damage to a character. And then Arthur on play, you can give one of any character, but usually your characters, one of them +2 challenger, +2 resist, and the ability to hit readied characters. So he's our anti-ward tool, right? So he's a Prince Philip Slayer. Beyond the Horizon is a very, very good and powerful card, especially in a meta with a whole bunch of board wipes. It is our one of our key answers to be able to punish people saving up hand for board wipes, or when it feels like when you have the Spider Sense tingling and you just feel like, they're holding at least 1, maybe 2 board wipes in their hand, right? And so it allows you to choose between having just you, just your opponent, or both of you discard your hand and draw 3, right? So you can, you're going to give them 3 cards, but most times, especially if you hit the right timing, what they're going to lose is far more devastating than anything they're going to get. So let's cover some of the theory of the list and things you have to think about and consider. It's a little bit more than you think. So there's removal thresholds, right, and efficiency setups. So these are like damage counts that as you're sort of making your inking decisions, building your curve, you really kind of have to have some good understanding of, right? A list like Sonic Boom takes a whole lot of setup, a whole lot of future planning. And so if you don't really know what you're anticipating to show up, right, you can't really plan your damage to appropriately remove relevant bodies. Singers and songs, kind of that specific mindset of how you have to change how you value characters on the board. Goliath triggers ink utilization, hand economy, and then filtering, right? So let's talk about removal thresholds for a little bit, right? So these are kind of your main 4 removal thresholds that you have to think about and be aware of, right? So you have your 1 willpower characters, and these are all very meta-relevant characters. You have your Alonwis and your yellow purples, rarely in your yellow blues. You have your Basil and your blurple lists, right? Rarely in your yellow blues. You have Olaf, who is basically in every single purple steel list, some yellow purple lists, some blurple lists, right? And then you have Mulan, which is going to be in your Sapphire Steel lists, some Amber Steel lists, and the occasional purple steel list. You have your 3 will-powered characters, right? And so Angel's going to be very prevalent. So you have to be a little aware of her. If they have no hand, she gets resist 2. So just don't forget that, right? Dumbo is still going to be here, right? He's just one of the stronger draw engines in purple, especially one that's repetitive. Cinderella, of course, and then the 1-drop lady who sticks around, right? Because she's so valuable. You have your 4 willpower characters. We have Aladdin, who is a new Whisper that came out in set 10, right? But now is finding renewed usefulness in set 11, along with Ariel, Ethereal Voice. Cheshire Cat, of course, who's always a major threat, and then opposing Moanas, which you will find most commonly in blue-yellow lists. And of course, your 6 willpower characters, which is essentially no different from set 10. You have your Hades, your Tramps, your Prince Phillips, and your Demonas, who these are probably the most common ones you will see, and all of which you have to sort of like future plan for. So when you think about like singers, right? I know in the game it's very tempting to generate and get your lore, right? You have to get to 20 lore to win the game, but having good and safe singers is such a big part of the list, and is a big way of how the list not only is a threat but maintains a threat. Right, and so, oftentimes when you exert, whether it's a challenge, quest, or sing a song, one thing you have to always think about is like, am I going to lose a singer by doing this, by exposing them? And if I do lose this singer, can I afford to lose this singer? Or is it worth waiting and stalling until I can have more of an oppressive turn to where as little singers as possible are removed, right? Always have a backup plan when you are singing a song, right? And when you commit to singing a song, it's a good habit to get into. Like you are okay losing this character, right? This character could get banished in some way. And so, that's one thing, that's a mindset to have to set yourself up for success as well. When you think about Goliath, right? So at the end of your turn, you have to end your hand with 2 cards in hand. Goliath is such an interesting draw engine. One could argue one of the most balanced draw engines, but to get the maximum value out of Goliath, right, you want your hand to be empty at the end of every turn, right? And so there is sort of this rhythm that it behooves you to get into to set yourself up for the maximum success for your main draw engine, which is Goliath, right? So, you want to play characters that still allow you aerial triggers, right? So you want to play a character, maybe like if you're going to 8 ink, right? Maybe you play a 6 cost character, right? You ink a card that takes you to 8, right, from 7, and then if your last card is a song, right, you can sing it. If you have aerial on board, you get a trigger out of it, and then you're empty-handed, then you draw 2, right? That's like a perfect card. That's like a perfect turn, understanding that Goliath is something you're playing towards, and that Goliath is, you want to get the maximum value out of Goliath. So that's like a, so when I was talking about like ink utilization, Goliath triggers, that's like a mindset shift that you have to be thinking about, especially when you're playing Goliath, and also thinking about when you deploy Goliath, because when you play Goliath, like especially on curve, which usually means you have 2 cards in hand, you gain actually no real value from that Goliath other than putting him on board. I mean, he's 6'5", he quests for 2, he's a big threat, but many people now like understand Goliath coming out of set 10. The surprise factor of Goliath isn't really there anymore, and now people know how to play around him. There's more outs for him, such as Let It Go, and so you have to be a lot more careful about when you play Goliath compared to set 10. And think about, like, in a perfect world, can you deploy other threats, right? Like Tinkerbell, Ariel, Hades, etc. And then, are you able to afford to be able to play Goliath as like the last card or second last card in hand, so you're drawing as many cards as possible, even the first turn you play him. So, to kind of give you a little bit more of a tactile example of Goliath trigger utilization, right? Let's say at the end of our turn, we end with 6 cards in the inkwell, right? So next turn we'd be going to 7, and so like a perfect turn with the cards that we have, right, would be inking, going to 7, playing Vincenzo, right, that uses all of our ink, and then maybe just singing with like a Cinderella with Thunderbolt. So you probably removed 2 characters, Vincenzo removing 1, Thunderbolt killing another, and you inked, right, for your turn. So you end your hand with 0 cards in hand, right? You're getting a maximum Goliath draw, right? You're maximizing your value, and it was a great turn. Same thing, like if you end your turn with 7, you're going to 8 next turn, which means that you can use an aerial trigger and play a 6 cost, such as this. And then if you're ending your turn with 8, you're going to 9, right? So then you can play a 7 cost character and still have the 2 ink left over to utilize with your aerial, right? So these are all like things to think about when you're keeping cards in hand, when you're utilizing cards, and kind of thinking of like even as early on as your turn to your ramp turn, like what are you kind of setting up towards later down the road for your first or second Goliath triggers. And don't forget, right, when let's say you have a Cinderella and a Goliath on board, and you play the Cinderella or you played another princess, and you get a Cinderella trigger, which allows you to ink from your hand to the discard, and then you get to draw another card, right? And so you do have to have a card in your hand first, meaning if you do these perfect turns and you end your turn with no cards in hand, as the turn player, you actually get to pick the order that your triggers that went into the bag get to resolve in. So you can draw with Goliath first, draw 2 cards if you ended your turn with 0, and then if you played that princess and you have Cinderella, you can utilize Princess Cinderella's effect, and you can ink a card from your hand and draw another card to immediately replace it. So you drew 2 cards, you gained an ink simply by just doing your turn naturally anyway. So good things to keep in mind. Hand economy and filtering, right? So in general, the Sonic Boom list does a poor job of tolerating top decking, right? You almost always want to keep at least 1 card in hand if you can afford it, and if you are not like on the eve of winning, right? And so, because sometimes, if you top deck a Namari, if you get other princesses and you have Cinderella on board and you want to be able to use your Cinderella trigger to keep drawing and inking, but basically getting through your deck until you find other options like draw options or removal options, So these are all reasons to think about, like, okay, do I really need that ink from this Tipo in my hand? Is it better to keep this Tipo in my hand in case I get these other like hand triggers, et cetera, et cetera. And so, when you are only having things like a princess trigger from Cinderella, your number one goal is to then find a draw engine. But in general, do your best to avoid top decking situations. Sometimes they are the right decision. But just do your best to not be in that situation if you can. So in regards to deck building, my general ratios for song counts to Ariel counts is, if you want to just kind of run like 2 Ariels, be a little more of a supplemental build, then 8 to 10 songs is the count you're looking for. If you are running 3, I'd recommend 10 to 14. And then, of course, if you're running 4, you are able to squeeze in 14 to 17, kind of fit that nice, perfect ratio. But, these are not like required song counts, but like if you wanted something to kind of match the consistency of finding Ariel, but then also getting her value, these are the numbers I would probably aim for. So this is the deck lists, Sonic Boom. So one key feature of Sonic Boom set 11 versus set 10 is that set 11 list has 11 cards. That's right. Or I'm sorry, 61 cards. Not 11, what am I talking about? 61 cards, which is 1 above the minimum, which most people adhere to the minimum very strictly, right, to increase your odds of finding cards you want. We sort of upset this by just basically including the 1 jump ahead, and the math checks out that having that 1 jump ahead in a 61 card deck still is a pretty big jump in consistency for hitting ramp on turn 2, even if I was at like if I don't have it at 60 cards. And the reason I didn't cut anything is because the honest truth is I really liked where everything was at. The list is very, very tight. Everything has a very clear purpose, and it really is designed and now ratioed to sort of just run on all cylinders. So we included 1 Belle for a 4-drop, right? As I said, you could think of her as almost like a 5th Cinderella. 2 Angels, right? So our 4 cost count is about 7. And the Angels, as I said, are there to kind of complete Ariel math, are really good into aggro lists. And so some people will run like 3 or 4. I definitely don't really like that. There's a little too many games where she is kind of, she's a bad top deck in most case scenarios, right? She doesn't feel good past her very specific spot and her very specific curve. She can kind of single-handedly win the game sometimes, but at what cost? So there's the 1 Moana. The 3 of Pete, right? He's a draw engine, and so you want to have as many decent, strong draw engines as you can. And Pete just happens to be one of them. Namari, I think, again, I'm a big advocate for Namari. Some people do not give her the respect that she's due. I think 2 Namari in the list is essentially required, right? So allows you to get rid of major bodies and threats. But the biggest thing is that she just helps find you songs. She helps you find value cards where in a way that no other deck can, to begin your turn with those value cards, right? So 2 Pluto for item removal, and his lore gain is actually kind of relevant, right? The maxed out 6 costs, Ariel, Goliath, Tinkerbell. It's very straightforward. 3 of the Hades, 1 of the Arthur, right? That's my typical ratio. 3 Vincenzo, and then there's our song spread, which we mostly talked about already. Came out to 16 songs. So with the Mulan, right, minimize 1-drops. I choose her over Hook because she does have the ability to filter later in the game, right? You can draw and discard. And then to be able to utilize Cinderella triggers on the cheap, but also to initiate Pluto triggers on the cheap as well. So actually on 6 costs, if you need that item gone immediately, you could play Pluto and play a Mulan and then get rid of it, right? Because you need another Steel character. So that's a kind of cool thing about her synergy with some of the other cards in the deck. But, as far as like survivability, some people say like, well, Hook has 2 willpower. So yes, this is true, but how many times is that really relevant? So I'd rather have the better strength. As I said, Belle functions as a 4th Cinderella, as a 5th Cinderella for the 2 for 6 line, and then Angel is that really good anti-aggro tool. In general, I would think of your 5-drops as techs, right? So when I'm putting in Pluto for item removal, I know it's because a lot of people love item removal, and online people love item removal, and so to me, he felt like a very good tech option that was deserving of the spot. Same thing, I would consider Moana mostly as tech as well. I don't think she's core to the list at all. Of these 5-drops, I would state that like Pete and Namari are the closest thing to required 5-drops. But, in general, I've always kind of said that like you can think of your 5-drop slots as tech, and you use it to fit your local meta, the tournament you're going to, online, etc., etc. So your 7-drop bombs, right? Unlike many Sapphire Steel lists, are not part of your main removal strategy. These are supplementary specialist removal characters. Vincenzo's a little bit of an upset of that. But Hades' job is to not just get rid of a 4-cost genie on curve because it's annoying. Hades' job is to get rid of the Demona that would take way too many resources to out. Is to get rid of that emergency cat. Is to get rid of Monstro, etc. So you use him to get rid of cards that, 1, you don't have answers for immediately, but also 2, more importantly, key threats that you either don't want in the discard or don't want to like do anything fancy, but that also gets rid of it with the least amount of efficiency, or the most amount of efficiency and the least amount of effort. Our songs, right? I consider the major tech songs that you can consider swapping out being Dino, Mob Song, One Jump Ahead, and even the Beyond, right? As I said, like I consider the 1 of Mob Song and the 2 Beyonds to be pretty required for the list, but I do understand that like the list can function without these. And so the core, the true core is really like Strength, Bolt, and Let It Go. And I know that my friend was even asking her friend who's running the sauce thing, is that like, like how many Let It Goes, right? Some people are running 4. I've found that 3 is like the perfect number. So, and some people just don't run Beyonds either. And that's okay. I think it's a little madness, but it's okay. So here's a couple of our variants, right? So this is Sonic Boom Mufasa. Actually, for a large period of set 11, we were running Mufasa as a main part of the list, and I was actually pretty convinced he was going to stay through set champs. That changed near the end. But he actually, it's actually pretty easy to curve into Mufasa with the list, especially with the Moana line, right? If you go like Sail, Cindy, Moana, and then you're basically at Mufasa already. The cool thing is that Mufasa also gives you the freedom to ink a lot of your inkable songs early on, where you kind of want to dump them and get rid of them quickly, especially with Amber builds, because they're fishing for those nice juicy actions with Mowgli's and such. But Mufasa allows you to get those songs back, right? 2 cards come back from the disc, the inkwell, and so way too many games have gotten Let It Goes and Strength of Raging Fires back, which just then did work. So Mufasa is a must answer. If he's not answered, like almost immediately, you're having Ariel getting to sing as much as she wants, and then you're also playing multiple major threats like 7 or 6 costs, twice per turn. So this is what I call basically the standard version, right? This is a very bread and butter, straightforward, predictable card counts of an Ariel build without a lot of the quote-unquote sauce. This is an Allies variant that uses Ariel as supplemental removal. These builds are definitely not common. They were a little bit more popular in kind of like early set 10 and even some mild attempts in set 9. I would say that in set 11 it's the least common version of any sort of Ariel build. Most people agree that if you're going to, utilize the Jasmine Allies package, that it's kind of just better to a little bit harder commit. You're already kind of burning non-ally slots on Goliath and Hades, and although Ariel has a pretty consistent ability to maintain value, her ability is a little bit hampered just due to like the nature, the natural cadence of allies decks, and so this is definitely the least common version, but it's still liable, especially if you're just running 2 Ariels, right? So she's inkable at the worst case scenario. So let's talk about tech slots for Sonic Boom in set 11. For your 1-drops, a lot of these are going to feel very similar to set 10, right? So you can do Captain Hook in your 1 slot. I think the value of Hook really dropped a lot. He was very valuable in regards to an appropriate tech slot against yellow-green dogs. Holding the board and sort of freezing that like 1-drop lady or their 2-drop champ and then another 1-drop lady on their turn 2 from getting some early lore, allowing you to have a harder or a more solid ability to come back later once you establish your removal engine. The dogs lines have changed a lot, and their optimal line now incorporates a Willow on turn 2, and they're able to get Tramp effectively the turn after if untouched. And then, turn 4, they're able to sing Under the Sea as early as that, right? And so this has completely changed the value of Hook, in my opinion, where his most valuable matchup was red-purple, which is already kind of a free matchup in general, right? He could take out the 2-drop Diablos, he could take out the 4-drop Legendary Hercules, and then he could freeze dogs. But now, they can just get rid of him with an Under the Sea in a couple turns, and then your Hook is gone. If you played Tipo, Tipo's gone, and then if you played Cinderella, Cindy's gone, and then and in a worst case scenario, they can even, when you play Tinkerbell, they can have the Grandmother Willow sing Della's Lullaby, shrink her down to 2, and then even Under the Sea away the Tinkerbell, right? So this line has not only gotten more consistent, but is kind of what most dog decks are designed around. And so it's really kind of eliminated Hook's ability. They weren't going to quest anyone, even if they were, the turn after they sing Under the Sea, they're questing out in 2 turns. And so he's just not really netting much value. At least with Mulan, you could even quest with her, at least get 1 or 2 lore. And then again, her late game value as the game goes on is just higher than Hook. So I think Hook has definitely lost a lot of his sauce in regards to an appropriate tech slot swap. As a lot of his matchups, he's just not as relevant or not as helpful. Yellow purple helps a little bit, but yellow purple just doesn't really care about the early bodies, right? So you could do Develop Your Brain. This is still very appropriate. It's a little greedy in my opinion. I think Mulan does enough, especially into Purple Steel, right? And Hook does help in Purple Steel, right? Especially with Christopher Robin's. However, if you get slapped back by a Calhoun, it does feel a little bad. Mulan does assist in kind of helping to slow down some early lore. It's in the long run not super relevant, right? She does a better job of kind of setting up some greedy dogs that try to get some early lore and set up for a Tinkerbell or something. But Develop Your Brain still has a good place in an Ariel list. You can dig a little deeper for your turn 2 ramp or Cinderella if you don't have them in your opening hand. As the game goes on, it can just help you find answers. I would say, and I've decided not to put it in my list largely because it does feel a little too greedy. I think Mulan achieves a close enough result, and Mulan allows for the 1-2-4 Beyond the Horizon setup, right? So you can play Mulan on 1, play Tipo on 2, play Cinderella or any 4-drop on the next turn 3, and then that gives you a 7 sing together setup to where you could Beyond the Horizon people. And this line is very oppressive, especially against other blue decks, and having access to it at a reasonable consistency is not irrelevant. And in fact, I'd say if you do it once in a best of 3, it's extremely respected and completely changes how people look at your board. So, and has just won games. You're looking at your 4 slots, right? There's definitely a lot of tech flexibility here that there was not previously. The one of Belle can definitely be swapped out for many things. The obvious one is Kita. Kita was in the set 10 list, and decks were just a little slower in set 10, right? There's a lot more cost reduction in set 11, like Grandmother Willow. There's a lot underdogs introducing higher lore earlier on, like Christopher Robin. And so, Kita has felt a little more risky in general. The hard part about Kita is that it feels pretty bad singing with her. Now, she's a safe singer, which is extremely nice, right? She's a warded 3/3. And so the odds of her surviving a sing is on the high side. If they set up a Calhoun or Captain Hook, she will probably be banished. But in most case scenarios, she's like a guaranteed singer in that, like, you know, there's almost nothing that can get rid of her on the turn that she's played, and so you could like bolt and just get rid of a target. However, then she's not getting you any real ramp value. Odds are very strong odds is that she's going to die the turn after singing. Whereas at least with Belle, if she does die on the clapback, she will get you an ink and helps with your, like, you know, continued ramping curve. So that's the big reason I chose Belle over Kita, was that, you know, Belle has a guaranteed ink opportunity, whereas Kita, you're faced with a hard decision on, do you use her trigger, do you challenge with her, do you sing with her, and all of those are like at odds with each other as in regards to getting to your like mid to late game plan. For our 5 slots, right, you know, you can think about, and then the other thing with the 4 slots, you can swap around your numbers, right? You could do 3 angels if you're really scared of aggro in your area. You could do 2 bells if you have a lot of control, and maybe even just get rid of angel, honestly. And so these are a lot of, you can toy around with these counts, or like, you know, swap out for Kitas. You can swap out the angel count, the bell count. There's not a lot of other reasonable 4-drops I'd consider putting into this slot, not with how the deck plays out. So with the 5 drops, again, these are strong tech slots. Really good techs to consider are Scuttle, right? Scuttle is an amazing 5-cost character. He has Ward. He's 5/5. He quests for 2, right? So worst case scenario, he's applying some lore pressure. He is an excellent challenger, right? He's extremely hard to get rid of, and effectively is a guaranteed nuisance whenever he's on the board. The downside and why I didn't put him in my list is that, you know, your 5-cost characters are very commonly like backup plans on curve, right? And it's not very common that you'd want to like play one of your 5-cost characters if you played Cinderella the turn prior. But then the other thing is that if you do, there's usually like a pretty big strategic advantage to why you're doing it, right? Like if you do with Moana, you are maintaining a lot of healthy hand value. You're optimizing your discard. You're getting a princess trigger. If you play Namari, similarly, you're getting a princess trigger. You're saving your hand. You're getting rid of bad cards in your hand. You're making this massive body on the board. That can, like, you know, like that kind of has to be answered. If you play Pete, you're sort of baiting like a Hades or an Ink. You're boosting him, and if he goes unchecked next turn, you're gaining constant value. You know, and Pluto's there as a, you know, clearly like a response to items. And so, you know, all of these have like sort of like downstream snowball, sort of like a strategic value. Whereas like Scuttle is more of just like, he's a threat that has to be answered at some point, but he's not really like pushing your plan forward. And in more cases than not, I prefer to have a card that does that as opposed to just be a threatening body. So that's the big reason. He's a guaranteed singer, but again, like he's, you know, you're, by the time you'd play him and you're not gaining other advantage, right? Like with Moana or Princess Trigger or like Namari, etc. or Pete, you know, you're kind of like getting pretty low on hand. And so, yeah, so that's kind of the things with Scuttle. Great character, but just not what I wanted for my main list. Lady Clock, right? So Lady Clock was on our set 10 list. You know, her and Kita are an excellent combo. The real reason that she's not in, because I had her in my like very first version, is simply space, right? There's just, at some point you have to cut somebody, right? And I even went up to 61 over 60 with this list. And even with that, she didn't make the cut. And when I was just thinking about like, well, what am I getting for the value? And with the way that the meta's kind of changed, people just playing greedier in general, you know, I kind of felt like I had to play a little greedier as well. And so, you know, the challenge-based boards are a little less common, and her like oppression into blue decks feels a little less reliable, especially like with the advent of like blue-yellow and blue-green getting more consistent. And so I went for the more specialized advantage-gaining cards like Moana, Pete, Namari, etc. over Lady Clock. Jasmine, she's a great body, right? She you know, challenges evasives. I think the real honest answer is why she's not in the list is basically because we have so many answers to evasives. Like evasives really aren't a problem. Like with Ariel, and now we have 3 Let It Goes. You know, Pete is finding answers faster for Ariel. Angel helps clean up the math for evasives. It's just, in general, we're just like, evasives have never really felt like a core problem, unless they like slam down 3 genies in a row and you just draw bad, to be totally honest. So. And then, as I mentioned earlier, Donald Duck, right? Donald Duck is an amazing item removal option. He and he was in the list. He was the list, right, for 2 weeks up until like basically the 1 or 2 days before set champs. I consider him superior into taking out Emerald Chromicon into dogs, right? And his stat line I actually consider superior too. He's 4/6, So, you know, he's not like trading with things like Tinkerbell or Goliath or whatever, but he's surviving challenges from cards like Pete and Demona, right? And, you know, I valued his ability to contest and deal with, and Chief Powhatan as well, and Amber, with the advent of the return of like Amber Steel Song. And so I consider his willpower and far more valuable in what I want out of a big steel body that's otherwise not doing much for me, which also makes him like a safer singer to me than Pluto. And he dodges World's Greatest Criminal Mind, which Pluto gets outed by that too. So like I actually really liked the 4/6 body on Donald, and then when you follow it up with a Tinkerbell, he deals with all the 5 willpower characters already, but then survives the large majority of them, which felt really good. So however, you know, again, Pluto won out in the end because his 2 lore gain actually ended up being more relevant in more games than the item removal for either of them, right? Sometimes even if you tech an item removal, it feels kind of like lucky just to have it in the right moment. But then also Pluto handles things like Snowforts and Amethyst Chromicons better. And with the rise of like Purple Steel Burn and these Snowfort decks, especially yellow-green and, you know, green-purple to a lesser extent, these, you know, Pluto just felt more reliable. Swaps for your bomb slots, right? Mufasa. As I said, there's a Mufasa build earlier in the video. He honestly felt amazing. He felt very consistent. I did not take him out because I did not like him. I took him out simply because my local meta felt a little too fast for him. And down in New Orleans felt like a better way to cheat ink and progress your board state than Mufasa in general. But Mufasa is excellent, especially if you're running into a lot of obnoxious blue decks. You can like maybe recycle something that's been inked. And if he doesn't get Hades'd or let it go, like the same turn he comes down, in most games you just kind of win. And if you play him into a purple deck, you know, and you're not like 1 turn from losing, right? You usually just win. They have like almost no way to get rid of him, unless it's like Blurple and they like ink him. As for the song counts, right? You know, I'm Much Faster is still a great slot, right? Let It Go, just in more scenarios, is a little bit more adaptable, flexible, especially as the mid-late game goes on. Faster is great if you have a lot of purple steel in the area for popping vanishes, right? So you're not inking for your opponent, but you are getting rid of their cobras and such and such, right? Still synergizes really well with Tinkerbell to get rid of things like genies and Elsas while gaining challenge value. And then, like, you know, it can kind of boost your weenies, right? Like Cinderella, Belle, and Angel to get rid of things like genies, whereas previously they weren't, while still getting like a really cheap aerial trigger. So Faster's still a great card. I think in a perfect world, I'd love to have 1 or 2 on the list, but, you know, you have to make space for something. Keep the Ancient Ways. I did a lot of testing with Keep the Ancient Ways. I actually really like this card. You know, it's a 2-cost song that when you play it, your opponents cannot play any actions or items until the start of your next turn. It's very powerful. It just straight up wins games against blue, yellow, and blue, green especially. Can feel very oppressive into like any steel song list, like blue steel or amber steel. There were just a few too many games where top decking the Keep the Ancient Ways or getting Ancient Ways when I would have wanted basically any other song was just a little too common. And it is like a little luck because, you know, if you wanted to consistently use it to stop like action-based game plans or like prevent board wipes, you really kind of needed like 3 or 4. But with the song counts that you need for every other matchup, you know, you kind of are looking at running at least, you know, it's hard to run more than 2. And 2 felt fine, but it didn't feel great. And I think after a long period of time, I'm like, there's too many games I'm just inking this. There's too many games where I draw it and I'm not satisfied with it. So, you know, I'd rather just cut it and commit to the other game plans and kind of rely a little bit more on Beyond the Horizon. So Mulligan strategies is pretty straightforward. You know, it's a blue deck, and blue steel in general has a very straightforward line. You know, you're looking for turn 2 ramp. That's your priority number 1, like Tipo and Sail, and 1 jump ahead, right? You're looking for Cinderella. This is almost always your preferred follow-up to your turn 2 ramp. You're looking for Inkables, right? And then have a 6 cost, and your ideal play line, your snowball line, is Ariel, right? So, in a perfect world, you could maybe think of it as Moana. It's a little greedier, but Ariel allows a little bit more flexibility, like she herself can sing, like down in New Orleans, or can just snowball a game. And then, you know, it'd be nice to have a draw engine at the end of it, right? So if your last card is Goliath, or like a Beyond the Horizon, that's, you know, the creme de la creme. So, for example, if we were on the play, blind, looking at this hand, you know, this is a hand that I would honestly just keep everything, right? So you have an extremely strong high roll here. You know, you can just ink the Mulan. You could play the Mulan. You could go Mulan, Tipo, Cindy, and then go into Ariel or Goliath, right, for a fast Goliath. You could ink the Mulan and play Sail, right? And then ink the Tipo, et cetera, play Cinderella, play Ariel, and then end. You should be able to end with being able to play the Goliath and potentially even have enough to keep the Dino and then play the Dino. So these are all potentialities. You know, so this gives you so many options for so many high rolls and is everything you want and need. So this is I consider a pretty perfect hand. If you want to get rid of anything, I'd probably send the Dino. Right. So looking at here, again, we're on the play blind. In most scenarios here, I would keep 2 of the turn 2 ramp, right? This is because, you know, you don't quite know if you're going to hit that Cinderella, but you really need to get to your 5 to 6 costs. And so I would keep the Tipo, keep the Sail. And then the other thing is they have to think about is like if they play a Mowgli and, you know, and you decide to Tipo first, right? You got to be careful about that. And so in most case scenarios, I would usually Sail first in this regard if you're keeping both to dodge anything like a Mowgli, getting rid of one of your ramp options. It's really tempting to keep Mulan here. I don't think you're wrong to do that per se. I think, you know, it kind of depends on my mood and the matchup and etc. But in most case scenarios, the math checks out that like it's better to send the Mulan. That's an extra card you're digging deeper for a Cinderella because you're just as likely with 3 Mulans in the deck to draw another Mulan. So this hand is just bad, right? It has no turn 2 ramp, it has no Cinderella. It's not really worth keeping anything. I would just send it all. And, you know, this is a hand that's considered a brick, even the Mulan, right? So it's an easy full send. So here's another one. This is kind of interesting. You know, the big question of, do you keep the Cinderella? Now, I'm an advocate that there's different schools of thought here, but I'm a big believer that if you have Cinderella, but you do not have your turn 2 ramp, you keep the Cindy, right? Because in a worst case scenario, if you just are inking to Cindy, Cindy allows you to still catapult yourself into a reasonable game, right? And there's still a fair amount of games that I've won where I just inked a bunch or played some Mulans and then played Cindy on turn 4 and then still got to jump to like my Tinkerbell and then like a Hades or Vincenzo or something else and then stabilize and then win the game, right? So Cinderella is still too good at that, right? And gives you an opportunity to come back in the game. But hoping if you send them all that you're hitting a turn 2 ramp and another Cinderella, I think is a little too lucky. So I recommend keeping her. But many people will say just send her. I don't think there's a agreed right direction. So what if you're on the draw, right? The strategy is mostly the same, right? You want to prioritize getting your turn 2 ramp. You, in many scenarios, want to prioritize your Cinderella. If you are against a Dogs deck or a Purple Steel deck that's going a little too fast, I think keeping a Angel is very reasonable as well. And then if you see Belle, I'd probably keep Belle if you have no other 4 cost and you have your turn 2 ramp, right? And then consider Mulan if you're playing into aggro or if you have the Beyond the Horizon line. The Beyond the Horizon line feels better into while on the play, but you know it's something to think about, right? You're gonna get 1 extra card anyway. So again, right, on the draw, this is a very, very solid opener. I would just keep this all, right? We have our turn 2 ramp, we have our Cinderella, we have 2 6 cost options, right? You know, we could play Goliath, which doesn't feel as good on the draw, but you know, if we dump our hand with that bolt, etc., or if we play Tipo and our hand's pretty small, trying to optimize what we have to set up for a good Goliath that's still reasonable, or you can play the Tinkerbell, play with Vincenzo as a follow-up, and then follow up with Goliath afterwards, right, while still singing with the bolt. This is again a hand where I would keep both ramps here, but if I'm on the draw, I would actually also keep the Tinkerbell, right? This, you know, again, in a perfect world, you want the Cinderella to ramp into the Tinkerbell, but even if you just had Tipo and Sail and you go into Tinkerbell on turn 4, and all you have on board is like a Tipo and maybe you find a Mulan in the process, that's like still like pretty good in regards to like stalling and freezing a board, right? Tinkerbell does so much, and if you're gonna have any fast 6 cost, Tinkerbell's usually the one you want if you're on the draw and on the back foot. In some scenarios, Ariel's superior, but in most case scenarios, like Tinkerbell feels a little bit better. So what are kind of the matchups, right? And the thought process on how this deck does into them. You know, the really easy ones is that Purple Steel, Amber Steel, Ruby Amethyst, these are very, very favorable, right? Ruby Amethyst, I would consider like a 90-10. This is basically a free matchup. The only ways that Ruby Amethyst wins is if they have like some crazy tech, like if they just have non-stop legendary Hercules and you just don't have good answers for him, or if you just brick. Really, they're kind of just hoping for you to brick. Amber Steel, I think like early on was kind of hard, but now that like both like we've kind of understand their lines and they've optimized their lines, and they have to account for more than just blue decks, right? I think Amber Steel I would consider it pretty favored. I'd say like maybe a 65-35 or like a 60-40 for us. The big thing with Amber Steel is that, you know, they really need to start off very hot, right? They need to sing early Akuds. They need to like take out your first Cindy, ideally with like their Thunderbolt. They need to like go kind of wide, right? Maybe play a Lilo or two. Hopefully get down one of their draw engines to stick like a Stitch or an Ariel. If you take out Ariel and Stitch, right? Like prioritize all removal on them, right? Like Angel can come later, Troubadour can come later. Willows are like actually kind of at the bottom of the totem pole unless you're able to knock them out very early on the play and disrupt their hand. But in general, you take out their draw engines and they will reach a point where their songs become pretty inefficient against our bigger bodies, right? Like they have to burn 2 bolts for Ariel. They have to burn like multiple strengths, multiple bolts, Angel triggers, which is discarding a card, right? To take out like anything past Cinderella. And that really starts to add up. Whereas our removal is very efficient, right? Especially with Ariel. So Ariel is taking out Angels for free, is taking out Nanis for free, is taking out Lilos, Willows, right? Like Bolt kills practically everything in the deck. Hades is getting rid of Stitch, is getting rid of Powhatan. Let It Go gets rid of everything, right? And so there reaches a point where like our removal efficiency just simply outvalues them. And once like the big bombs like Vincenzo, Hades, and then like Ariel hits, like they are on a very definitive clock. And if you get even 1 or 2 turns with Ariel, it's just game over, right? They really need to close. And if it reaches a point where you're both kind of like fishing for songs, you know, your single song will outvalue their single song. So Purple Steel also similarly, like they need to go super fast and they need like their perfect opener. They need a 1, 2, 3, 4 sing strength and then just quest out very, very fast. If you are able to freeze them between 10 to 16 lore, right? And they're kind of a little bit out of Cobra reach. You've just won the game, right? This is a deck where they need to, their first strength needs to have huge value and they need to hope you kind of brick and they need to like quest aggressively and fast. And if they're not able to do that, right? Like if they're kind of stuck with like Hooks and Calhoun standing up doing nothing, then they kind of just lose. So like again, like Ariel kills basically everything in the deck. Our song value is way too efficient and then they don't have good answers for our bombs as the game goes on. Neutral matchups, I would say, so Blurple is very interesting. Blurple is, I'd say maybe like a 45-55. It's overall skill matchup. I consider it pretty even. The challenge with Blurple is that their ability to hit their consistent lines that disrupt ours is a bit more consistent than our ability to hit the ones that affects theirs, right? Like they can afford to just spam out a Let It Go or Into the Unknown or Hades on our draw engines, and that hurts more than us hitting their draw engines because like they have like all the books, they have all the Dumbos, they have all the Demonas, they have so much more plethora of burst to draw than we do. And so the big thing with the Blurple matchup is that you need to be very strategic about when you deploy your draw, right? Like I would almost never these days, and this was very different than set 10. Set 10 rushing to Goliath, it was just like a death sentence for them. But now with Let It Go, most Blurple players are holding Let It Go in case you try to rush Goliath. They're okay with just burning a turn to let it go your Goliath because now you're down to like 2 cards, right? And odds are one of them is not a draw engine. And so if you're going to deploy an early draw engine, I almost always recommend it to be Pete, boost him, so at least getting 2 ink if they're going to burn a turn, let it going or Hadesing him. And then I would save Goliath in most situations for if he's your final card, and almost never, if you can avoid it, ink a Goliath, right? You need to save them and you need to deploy them because you're baiting out moments when he's not going to get removed instantly. And if he can stick for 1 or 2 turns, that usually gives you plenty enough gas to fight for their board. Contesting their board is not the hard part. It's keeping up with their gas and maintaining your draw engines. While they have so much more draw engines, their card value as the game goes on is worse than ours. Their removal opportunities is worse than ours, right? They depend on a lot of the strong like single target removal early on, getting rid of our early singers and then being able to go wider because we're not able to sing and establish bigger bodies. And so if you can hold off their and put out like bait cards. Early on, I try to always put out early Tinks or early Vincenzos and force them to use their early Hades or Let It Goes or whatever on those cards. And then I start dripping out, Pete's, Goliaths, and Ariels. Those are your value cards that sort of need to survive and stick in that matchup. Make sure you get rid of all Cheshires, right? You don't have to super prioritize Genies. Genie's annoying, but if you have to choose, you should choose things like Cheshire Cat or Iago's, right? Get rid of things that are threats to your board. If he gets like 2 or 4 lore, it's not a big deal. You can handle that later, because there reaches a point where they're just not really questing anymore because you're getting rid of everything too fast. And then as the game goes on, their ability to deal with multiple targets is very bad, especially with how big our bodies are. And so when we start questing out all of our big singers, or like Vincenzo's or whatever, they have like 1 turn to deal with it, and they have a really hard time doing that because it's just it's all 1-for-1 removal. Yellow purple is really interesting. Yellow purple used to be a pretty easy matchup for us. It's basically like purple steel plus, the temple version, with like lanterns and such, and trying to get to fast demonas in set 10. Now that like they have Raging Storm, many of these decks are kind of just play libraries, use your board wipe, and just play keep away for your locations, and it's pretty annoying, to be totally honest. A lot of their early game is just draw cards like Cusco and Elsa, and then when they reach like 4 to 6 range, they're just unleashing like rush cards to slow you down or disrupt you, right? Like Tyrans, Svens, and then when they start reaching like 6 plus, they're going to start laying down libraries with other cards to protect them, like Royal Guards, etc. Using strategic demonas to disrupt your key threats. And then that first Raging Storm, ideally they've set up a library, but that first Raging Storm kind of resetting the game and then deploying tons of libraries and obnoxious rush characters. So that play style of yellow purple is very, very annoying. Almost every other play style is pretty free. And so, a lot of it is kind of like getting rid of some of their early value questers, while, not overcommitting your removal resources, like bolting a Genie, right? But then like dealing with all the weenies with tech challenges, whatever. And then, using the period where they're at 5 to 7 ink, right? Where you just are questing aggressively and you're saving key, removal and draw sources in your hand, when they reach 8 ink. So when you're expecting the wipe, right, they wipe you, and then you're just going to refill the board, and then now you start trying to force them to answer you, right? And then kind of feeling out if you think they have a second one or not, right? Really good Beyond the Horizon is game winning in that matchup, right? So if they're just like being so greedy, they're like spamming books or finders keepers, and if their hand is ever above 4, you beyond it, right? You beyond it. You don't even think about it. And odds are, because if they're prior to 8 ink, odds are they're saving at least 1 storm, usually 2. So that first beyond, I'd never ink beyond in this matchup. If I see beyond, I hold on to it for dear life. And then as soon as the turn before 8 ink, or even a little bit earlier, right? Hopefully it doesn't get Mowgli'd, but you wipe their hand and you reset it, and odds are you hit 1 to 2 storms. Blue Steel, the matchup is really like, who goes first is so huge in that matchup. Do you have Cinderella or not? If you do have Cinderella, do you have Bolt or not? And then basically just who slams down more bombs, right? Do you have more Hades than your opponent? Do you get more Bolts than your opponent? Do you have more Vincenzos than your opponent? That's kind of the matchup in a nutshell. It doesn't feel amazing most times, and these games are almost never back and forth. It's usually very one-sided. So the Blue Steel mirror is kind of weird, but you don't really see it that often that many people play Blue Steel. And if you do, you're probably going to see an allies variant. Dogs is kind of interesting. As I said, dogs used to feel a lot more back and forth. I'd say dogs also is like a 45-55. Some days it feels like a 40-60. But in most case scenarios, there's a lot of skill at play. If they're on the play and they see their one drop lady into Willow, into Tramp, into like Under the Sea Dellas, those games are usually kind of just many times just game over. And you're hoping to just follow up with like repeat Tinks, right? So you save Tinkerbells, you hold on to Tinkerbells, you play her, and you just keep playing her to splash that 1 damage. And usually on the second Tinkerbell, you're wiping out a whole bunch of characters and stabilizing, and then you're like playing Hades on the big tramps, and then you're just trying to like, fight for board, right? As hoping their hand kind of runs out. If they see a bunch of 5-drop ladies, it feels pretty bad. If they see a really badly timed Chromicon for you, it feels pretty bad. And then of course, if they get a really high yield Under the Sea with the Dellas, it feels pretty bad. But like, think about when you'd want to Angel to take out the Willow to force them to ink valuable cards that they're trying to save to get those big setups. Like if you play Angel on 4 and then discard and get rid of the Willow immediately, they're forced to like ink, and then when they draw with Big Tramp, they're only able to hold like 1, maybe 2 cards at most, and so they can't have as much diversity in their plan. And then just making sure you're not falling for go-go traps, and in many cases, if you have to get rid of a target, right? Willow is tempting for bigger songs, but I would actually prioritize taking out like ladies to prevent like shift ladies. Really, really bad matchups. Blue-yellow just feels terrible. There's no way around it, right? They have all of their like Let It Go and Hades removal is just too efficient for us for our bigger bodies. They kind of just rush to Raging Storm, and Raging Storm clears the board. This matchup, there's no way that it feels good. Most case scenarios, you're kind of banking on well-timed Beyond the Horizons to discard greedy hands, and then just trying to go faster than them. This is a matchup where we're the aggressive questing deck, right? Slam down bodies, turn sideways, always force them to respond to you. In most scenarios, try not to challenge when you could quest. Blue-green is kind of a weird matchup. It's unfavored as well. Their high roll is just so oppressive for us, right? Like if they get Cinderella or Donald Duck into Clarabelle Shift, and then you're welcome. That just so efficiently gets rid of our big bodies. It's so hard for our singers to stick. And then if they get that first Clarabelle, you're welcome. Many games, it's kind of game over. You're really, really, really reliant on really good responsive Hadeses. So if they do Clarabelle, or if they do a Mean, Malicious, Scary, and Philip, you sort of have to like slam down Hades immediately. And yeah, it doesn't feel great giving them ink, but it's one of the best ways to get rid of their big-bodied characters while establishing a singer again. If you're able to establish singers, the matchup doesn't feel too bad. And again, this is kind of like blue-yellow and purple-yellow, where like so much of the matchup can be just won by a really good Beyond the Horizon and discarding a lot of key answers, namely the Philip board wipe in their hand. This is also a matchup that feels very play-draw dependent. Basically the player that can keep singers off the board, right? Like if you can bolt their Cindy, bolt their Clarabelle, even their Donald, if you play like Tinkerbell after Cinderella, then bolt him, right? And then just keep singers off while you build up your singers. Those games are usually just won. Save King Arthur to take out the 3-drop Philip. Green purple is just annoying, right? It's not enough of the meta share to really stress about too much, but Snowfort sucks, Cheshire sucks. They almost always open up with Webby Vanderquack, which feels terrible. And so if they have the Webby opener into Snowforts, it's kind of an auto loss. There's almost no way to reasonably catch up to that. But outside of that, it's just, get rid of their evasives, prepare for Snowfort, establish Pluto when you can, and then, just anticipate that they might get at least one Philip board wipe, right? It's harder for them to do it than blue-green. But just play around that, quest when you should, avoid obvious go-go traps, and you should be okay. But the Webby openers followed up by Snowfort is just hard. So here are some standard play lines for a lot of the different matchups. A lot of these are going to look pretty similar across certain matchups just because certain play lines are just so powerful, right? And the ideal lines are the ideal lines. Purple Steel, as I said, getting to your fast Ariel, singing that bolt with Cindy, getting rid of Cheshire Cat, or their 3-cost singer in general, kind of just wins the game. Sometimes Cinderella will die to a Calhoun, and that's okay, right? Once you establish Ariel, if you're able to get like one more sing round off of Ariel, and then especially if you can like sing establish Goliath, the game is basically over, right? And so they have no good way to get rid of Ariel efficiently. Ariel just basically gets rid of everything too efficiently, and they're just hoping that you don't find Ariel, and if you do, that you just don't find songs. Blue-green is a tough matchup, as I said, in general. And so on the play, one of your preferred lines is almost, again, like Cinderella. You bolt the singer, right? It's a war of singers. You do not let them welcome you. And if they do, you make them earn it. And then Tinkerbell is kind of held here because if they play Donald Duck, who has 5 willpower, he's Tinkerbell plus Bolt is the only way to get rid of him. But in many cases, it's going to be like 1-drop Clarabelle and a Cinderella, right? And so, Bolt is usually enough. And then if you want to play a fast Goliath, you can. If you want to play a fast Ariel, it's not unreasonable. It's one of the lesser helpful matchups to get an early Ariel. And then, this matchup is very dependent on like a lot of your 7-drops actually. So really good Hades, really good Arthurs, and then using them to establish efficient beyonds to just clear hands that you think are dangerous. Yellow green, this matchup is all Tinkerbells, right? So you hold Tinkerbells, you play Tinkerbells, you use Bolt to get rid of something strategic, use Hades to get rid of a big tramp, and then many times you want to ink your Goliaths because having them get free refill draws while they're questing out, especially if they play Chromacon, feels pretty bad. And so actually, like in a perfect world, your first burst of draw will be from a Beyond the Horizon or like a Pete. And so, you don't want to hold the Beyond because they'll play Ursula or Mowgli to get rid of it. But if you draw into it and you're like 1 or 2 turns away from it, it's not unreasonable to hold it. And then, keep using your Tinks to clear the board and Hades to strategically get rid of big ladies or big tramps. On the draw, for Purple Steel, it's not too different. The only exception being like you want to maybe have a strong 7 drop as a follow-up to your Ariel because the odds are your Cinderella is going to die. And so, yeah, if they let Cinderella live, you play Bolt. But usually Cinderella will get strength. You establish Ariel or Tinkerbell, right? Ariel feels a little bit safer because many times they'll follow up with like an Elsa and they'll just take out Tinkerbell, right? With like Calhoun and Elsa or like Hook and Elsa. But Ariel, again, feels terrible to try to out, and they'd lose too much of their board to get rid of her efficiently. And if they do, you follow up with your 7 drops to kind of finish off the ones that are all damaged. And then you kind of just reestablish. Blue-green is just hard, right? So you're hoping for multiple Hadeses to stabilize, while if they get the You're Welcome opening on you, they play Clarabelle, they You're Welcome, you respond with Hades. And then they'll usually try to establish maybe like another Clarabelle or John Silver, maybe some of their more 4-drop singers, like another Cindy, another Donald, and then you just keep trying to get rid of singers until you're able to set up for a Beyond. And then other removal options. Yellow-green is just play Tinkerbells. Tinkerbell. Nonstop, right? Against puppies. You keep playing Tinkerbells until there's nothing left on their board. So playing like double Tink or even triple Tink kind of just wins games. And then, using strategic Hadeses. Most case scenarios, you're inking your songs early on. So like if you TPO, I would actually get rid of that Bolt because if they play a Mowgli or an Ursula and you're not ready for it, losing that in your hand it's too much. On the play against Yellow-Purple, it feels pretty similar to Purple Steel in most case scenarios, right? Getting a fast Tink doesn't feel as helpful into that matchup like it used to be, right? And so, in many case scenarios, I would try to get for a fast Ariel, if not just to like continue your Princess triggers, get to your high ink count to get ready for the board wipe war. You got to be careful with songs here. Yellow-Purple is very happy to play early Mowglis. They don't really care for a lot of their early board presence until like 4 or 5 ink. And they're just kind of, everything prior to 4 ink, they're just doing to disrupt you or draw, right? So they're playing like their Cuscos, their 1-drop Diablos. They will be very, very happy to play Mowgli on turn 2, but otherwise they'll be playing Willows to kind of ramp up to their bigger evasive bodies like Genie or Elsa a little faster. And so if they're not going to play Willow on turn 2, then they're usually playing Mowgli. Very, very rarely they'll be prioritizing like a Cusco. And then fast Goliath against them is a little risky because many times, especially if you're on the play, they will probably hold a World's Greatest Criminal Mind. I don't think it's unreasonable to risk a fast Goliath right after Cinderella. If you get away with it, you kind of just win those games. And so, maybe if you're in like a best of 3 and you sort of feel out how many Criminal Minds they have, if it's like 2 or less, then I think going for a fast Goliath is very reasonable right after Cinderella. Otherwise, I would save him to be one of your last cards for the board wipe war. Amber Steel, we kind of talked about this a lot earlier in the matchup section. But in general, right, you want your Cinderella. If Cinderella survives, right, then it really doesn't matter what you play because odds are you've won. But Tinkerbell is really nice as kind of like a bait for early removal while still splashing damage. And then, playing Ariel immediately after Cinderella is fine, but Tinkerbell at least like threatens multiple questers, right? And so if they have like a singer and like played like 4-drop Ariel or something, if they can't get rid of Tinkerbell immediately, they feel a little bit more hesitant to sing with anything. Whereas with Ariel, they may like quest out a little bit, even if they're able to wipe out multiple things by just singing with her, but then that slows down your character curve. The first Hades in this matchup kind of like closes the games many times because it's too big of a tempo swing, right? Like if you Bolt their Ariel and then Hades their Stitch or their like Troubadour and they lose 2 singers, they usually just lose the game. If they are not able to keep a 4-drop or like a singer 4, like a 4-cost singer, and you're able to keep yours, then the game's over. Almost every time. Blurple, we kind of talked about Blurple a lot earlier, right? Again, Blurple is all about saving your draw engines for the end, right? You hold Goliath, you hold Pete, and if you're going to deploy one earlier, you do Pete. Early Tinkerbell to bait, early Namari, early whatever. Basically any other 5-drop or 6-drop to bait. Ariel's not an unreasonable bait. You have to really kind of judge the games on whether you want to hold that first Ariel to deploy and be a threat, or if you want to if you're kind of feeling out like a Let It Go or Hades is coming, then do you play out the Ariel to bait out that removal, get rid of it, and then you play like your draw engine to follow up, thinking it might be more safe. So you kind of have to feel that a little bit. I think on the play, right, again, you don't do the fast Goliath. If you want to do a fast Pete or fast Ariel, it's very reasonable, and that kind of continues your advantage curve. And then, having that first bolt is so key. Getting rid of that first Cheshire, getting rid of that first Genie, getting rid of that first Isis or Iago is just so good. On the draw, right, the lines are honestly pretty similar, right? If you're kind of like flush back, it really kind of depends on the curve after the 7 ink, right? Like kind of your follow-ups, right? Many times you want to, but like in all honesty, like on the play versus on the draw kind of feels the same thing. You want to do the same thing for all 3 of these matchups. You're just kind of hoping when you're on the draw that things stick. And if they don't, you want your bigger, beefier bodies like your 7 costs or your chunkier 6 costs like Ariel to just hold until you can have singers stabilize. And then once you do, you're able to make reasonable comebacks, especially in Amber Steel versus in Blurple. Blurple on the draw can definitely feel very, very hard. This matchup feels very different if you're on the draw versus on the play. Some of the Blurple high rolls are just so oppressive, it's almost impossible to come back. Like if they play Isis or something on 4 and then get rid of your Cinderella or whatever else you had at that time, like maybe a Tipo or like a Mulan, and then they play Elsa on 5, and then they have almost no hand, and their exact last card is Demona. They draw 3 cards, and then the next turn they sing Let It Go, and then they play another Demona, and they draw 3 cards, and then they play Hades after that. I mean, it's just like, those games are kind of non-games, and you just don't stress about that. If they hit that on the play, there was nothing almost any deck could have done against that. But similarly, if you're on the play and you bolt them first, and then you follow up with Ariel, and then you bolt an Ariel trigger, and then you like Vincenzo, and then you strengthen Ariel trigger. Those are also like they just kind of lose, and they're kind of banking on their first Hades having enough value to hold. I'd say as a general rule for Blurple, you almost always try to never Hades first. You almost know that their first major removal is going to be that Hades on 7, if they're not going to sing Let It Go. And if you kind of can predict that, you just hold your Hades for when they Hades, immediately removing their character for yours, and them kind of hoping for a decent comeback, right? Like odds are they don't have 2 Hades, odds are they haven't held another Let It Go. And so, that's what I'd recommend in that regard. So let's kind of go over like a play line here with Purple Steel, which is a very common matchup. So, again, if you're on the play in a perfect world, you want to like just kind of ink first and pass, preserve that hand, right? If you don't kind of really know what you're playing against, they play Captain Hook, very common opener. We would Sail here, right? Again, we're going to go for the greedy opener. They would Calhoun, very, very common. Getting no real value. Hook maybe quests. You play Cinderella. There's nothing they can really do about that. Maybe they play Cheshire Cat. Maybe they play Lexington, right? You would play Ariel as your perfect follow-up to Cinderella here. This is kind of a hard decision. But in, most case scenarios, when you play the Ariel, right, you are bolting to get rid of that Cheshire Cat. It's also very reasonable to just hold the Cindy, right? If you bolt the Cheshire Cat, Cinderella gets eaten up by a Calhoun. And so if you wanted to wait with your song removal until Ariel establishes, right, Cinderella does survive on the play because they don't get the chance to sing first. Ariel jumps you to 7 ink, and then you ink to 8, right? So then you can start utilizing your songs to gain so much more added value. In this scenario, we are playing a Down in New Orleans, right, which then spits out a free Tinkerbell, which then also allows for an Ariel trigger to get rid of that Cheshire Cat, and then we play Goliath. So we went from 2 characters to 4, and then Goliath refills our entire hand, which is pretty impressive. This is probably one of the strongest openers you could do, and there's very little way for them to come back from this reasonably, especially if you followed up something like a Vincenzo. many games, if you don't have that first song to get rid of Cheshire Cat, or they're on the play, they will get rid of your Cinderella. It's not the worst thing in the world, right? You could just play the Ariel, set her up and establish, right? You could play Vincenzo, get rid of Calhoun, right? Just gonna build your bodies. They may Elsa, try to get rid of Ariel. It feels terrible if they tried to do this, right? And in fact, like they would have to run Genie, Elsa, Cheshire, and Hook into her. You know, you could play Tinkerbell afterwards, in which case you would get rid of Genie, you would get rid of Cheshire, and Hook died in the process, right? And then you could follow it up with almost anything else after that. So they have to be really careful if they want to actually trade that much into Ariel. And that just shows how much of a nuisance Ariel is. Like even outing her as Purple Steel feels so terrible if you have any reasonable follow-up like that Tinkerbell. And then in many cases, you know, they can just lose. If Ariel survives, right, you could sing a song, pay 2 ink, and then take out like Cheshire Cat, take out Calhoun, and then play like a 5 cost. Or if you have enough to ink, right, you could. And this is again assuming you did Cinderella trigger and you did not sing with Cinderella, so you're at 7 to 8 ink, right? You could play Bolt. You could sing Down to New Orleans, and then do an Ariel trigger, and then hard cast Bolt, you know, and you inked to 8, and then do another Ariel trigger and just clear the board. Right, I've done that plenty of times too. Sometimes just singing songs with only Ariel and 8 ink is one of the most oppressive things you could do. And then the following turn, especially if something like you play Dino and you get a free Goliath, you just kind of just, you know, win the game. So in general, right, Sonic Boom, you know, this is just a passion project of mine. It's the list I think I've grown to become so in tune with, right? It's definitely like how I think about the game now. It's powerful, it's versatile, it's fun, it's got pizzazz, it puts on a show for the crowd, you know. It really makes you think about how you need to navigate your turns and plays, and every win feels earned. It's a pretty strong into a wide field, right? It has very clear matchup spreads, but it has legs into everything. It can win against everything, which is not what every deck can say. It's just a cool deck, right? It's just a cool, fun, satisfying deck, and anyone watching this, you know, they're probably going to be cheering for you. And then it's just got this amazing cast of characters. I mean, look at these Enchanteds, that Cinderella, Ariel. You've got you got a massive spread of princesses, and what's more Disney Lorcana than princesses? What can I say? So if you guys stuck with the video this long, I appreciate you. You know, it's just been so cool to see so many people playing this list, and you know, many people play it and they don't even know I put it together, right? Which is so cool. The list has kind of transcended to really become a part of the Lorcana lexicon, right? So appreciate you all for just being a part of this journey with me. If you like the video, you know, hit that subscribe, like, share it, spread the word, and please let me know how you do at Set Champs, right? I'd love to know if you took this list, if you did, what changes you made, and if you didn't, you know, just how the games were, right? And how you did. But thanks for watching. Appreciate you all. May you be blessed. Take it easy. You know how it is. Peace.